Hi, everyone. It's time for another remote recorded lecture here in studio in Santa Barbara. This one on the Bermuda Triangle, one of the more interesting topics, not because I think there's a mystery to be solved. I think there is no mystery to be solved, but it's a case study in how to evaluate claims in the context of vastly distorted facts about stories that actually never happened. So we can start with the myths of the Bermuda Triangle. You can just, if you Google the Bermuda Triangle, you'll get all kinds of crazy graphics and mostly paintings of mysterious things because the photographs are not very interesting or they don't exist. The triangle is supposedly, let me get my little laser pointer up here, this little triangular shape between the island of Bermuda, somewhere down here in southern Florida, Fort Lauderdale, Miami area, all the way over to Puerto Rico here. Just any of these islands will do. The size of the triangle varies depending on the author you're reading or the documentary you're watching. But this is the most famous of the different triangles. As we'll see toward the end of this lecture, there's actually triangles all over the world. But that's another story here in a moment. So our story begins, that is the myth. In this case, by myth, I mean not just story, but also not true story. And one in which that the claim is that it is true. So that's why it's of interest to us. Anyway, the story begins with this fellow here, Vincent Gaddis, in February 1964 issue of Argosy magazine. Argosy magazine is one of these publications that dealt with a lot of the supernatural, the paranormal. And in the 60s, this was a growing, burgeoning field of study, also of publishing. So as you can see here, like in the cover, not only the deadly Bermuda Triangle, but also down here, UFO, flying saucer. Okay, so you'll see there's a lot of overlap with this. Anyway, so this is where the term comes from. This guy Gaddis called it the Bermuda Triangle, the deadly Bermuda Triangle, to put an emotional valence to it. And then the story grew when Fate magazine started publishing a lot on the Bermuda Triangle because it sells magazines. Fate is both Argosy and Fate basically publish the kinds of things every issue of Skeptic debunks. Pretty much every lecture we have in this course is skeptical of. So that kind of tells you how far apart we are from them. Anyway, by the way, here's the famous flying saucer images that supposedly Kenneth Arnold in his little plane in the state of Washington saw, which he said they skipped like saucers on the water. He didn't say they look like saucers, but anyway, once this image gets published, we end up with that kind of image. Anyway, let's go back to the Bermuda Triangle. They claim solved. Well, that's not what they try to do, but we will in this lecture. It really took off when Charles Berlitz and Richard Weiner published their books in 1974. Charles Berlitz was a publisher of language books. He's sort of famous for that, made his money doing that. But as a sidelight, he was publishing books on various mysteries. He's the guy really that put Roswell on the map as well. But his book, The Bermuda Triangle, the best-selling saga of unexplained disappearances. And in this classic 1970s, this is an updated cover here. This is an original one by Richard Weiner. It just has that 1970s look to it, $1.50 from Bantam Books. A saga of the mysterious sea where ships, planes, and doomed human beings disappear forever. Thousands of lost souls, hundreds of missing machines, an unsolved mystery, a monstrous death trap in the world's most dangerous waters. Illustrated with 16 photographs. Okay. And continuing, there's books every couple of years cranked out about the Bermuda Triangle, pursuing the truth behind the world's greatest mystery. And again, another updated version of Charles Berlitz's The Bermuda Triangle. Oh, I think this was a documentary film about that. Yeah. And most of the explanations that are, kind of enticing or supernatural or paranormal. Some people think it's leftover technology from the lost continent of Atlantis. They often trot out the Bimini Road near Bimini in the Bahamas. It's an underwater road. It's not a road at all. It's just a geological formation that looks like it's constructed by humans, but it's not. There's lots of geological formations, by the way, that form that way, and nobody thinks they're part of the lost continent of Atlantis. But because of its location and supposedly where Atlantis was supposedly located in the Atlantic. Anyway, that's how that got linked to that. We're not talking about Atlantis in this lecture here, but anyway, if you Google this, you can find as if that image is a photograph. Of course, it's not. It's just a painting, and there's nothing like that if you dive in that area. Okay. Continuing with supernatural explanations or extraterrestrial explanations, there's again always a connection with UFOs and the Bermuda Triangle, and even Spielberg put it on the map at the end of Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Remember when the mothership comes down and does all the music and all that stuff, and then the door opens, the aliens come out, and then at the end, the crew of Flight 19 exits the mothership in their Navy uniforms, as if they've been sitting in this ship for decades. In their Navy uniforms, they never bothered to shower and change. Oh well. Anyway, that's how myths are built. So the UFO connection to the Bermuda Triangle is a fairly common one, or multidimensional states of matter. So here's a submarine coming out of some other dimension beneath the waves of where the Bermuda Triangle is located. This is supposed to be some kind of supernatural storm. Of course, this is probably the best explanation we have for what really happens. Nasty storms that cause ships and planes to disappear. Really took off, especially the first time I heard it was on Leonard Nimoy's show. So Leonard Nimoy's show, he was the host. And so this is the famous In Search Of that's been remade with the actor hosting it who plays Spock in the current movie. So that was kind of a funny connection there. But anyway, this show, more than any other in the 70s, popularized the supernatural and the paranormal in a way that made it seem like it could be real. So I'm going to show you a clip from this show just to kind of set up how it's presented and what the problem with this statement that he makes in this show compared to the way a scientist would think about this mystery. Okay, so let's go to that clip. Okay, here's the clip from Leonard Nimoy's In Search Of about the Bermuda Triangle.
And then there are the other cases, the disappearances that cannot be explained. They occur most often in a triangle-shaped wedge bounded by Florida, the Bahamas, and the island of Bermuda, the so-called Bermuda Triangle.
The search for solution to the Bermuda Triangle mystery has been abandoned by some experts who claim there is no mystery. On a television program underwritten in part by a national science foundation, the statement was made that science does not have to investigate the Bermuda Triangle. Each disappearance, the program contended, can be readily explained. The only possibilities not taken into consideration by that statement are the personal stories of individuals who've been involved in strange occurrences. Somewhere in these stories, the clues may exist that will open the way to the final solution of the Bermuda Triangle mystery.
Okay, that statement, wow. Let me show you what that statement really comes from. Okay, the TV show that Leonard Nimoy is referencing here is actually Nova, the PBS documentary series in 1976, did an episode called The Case of the Bermuda Triangle. And here's the statement that they make that Nimoy is referencing. When we've gone back to the original sources or the people involved, the mystery evaporates. Science does not have to answer questions about the triangle because those questions are not valid in the first place. Ships and planes behave in the triangle the same way they behave everywhere else in the world. Okay, so there's nothing really to explain, and the rest of this lecture shows why. And it really what Nimoy is saying in that statement from his show is we know that the scientific evidence doesn't support this, but there's a lot of really interesting stories and anecdotes about spooky things that happen. Therefore, we're going to do a show on it. Okay, this is the problem with most of this television programming. Most of the producers of these shows, I know because I've met them, they're skeptics like me. They don't believe this stuff, but they feel like it makes a great story. It's good for ratings. You've got to sell commercials on her TV show, and so on. It's a business. So, but from an educator's perspective, this is the problem, because these memes take hold, and then people repeat these factoids as if they're true when they're not true. Okay, let's get into it. All right, so here's the truth behind the Bermuda Triangle. Starting with the famous Flight 19. Okay, this is so the Close Encounters of the Third Kind ends with this. The whole thing begins with Flight 19. December 5th, 1945, a squadron of 5 of these single-engine bomber planes from World War II. So the war is over now. There's 14 total men, led by Lieutenant Charles Taylor, who was on a routine practice bombing run off of Fort Lauderdale, and all of a sudden he radios in, "We're entering white water. Nothing seems right. We don't know where we are. The water is green. No, white." Okay, this is always quoted like ooh, this big spooky mystery. All right, let's look at what actually happened here, but starting off with remembering that the unexplained is not the inexplicable, and mysterious does not mean supernatural. Now, I'm going to show you what happened here and how we know it. But first, even if there's something I can't explain, so what? If you have 1,000 incidents in the Bermuda Triangle and I can explain 950 of them, it doesn't mean the 950 have natural explanations and the 50 mysterious ones have supernatural explanations. It just means we can't explain everything. Okay, I've said this like 27 times in this course already, that chasing anecdotes that have yet to be explained is not a form of valid knowledge. The burden of proof, again, remember, is on the person making the extraordinary claim, not on the scientist and skeptic to explain what isn't currently explicable. Okay. So here it is. So here is the flight path from Fort Lauderdale. They take off. Let me get my little virtual laser pointer here. So the 5 Avenger bombing planes with the 14 men led by Taylor take off and head due east toward this little chicken shoals here, just rocks sticking up out of the water that they're going to practice dropping bombs on as just for training. Okay, so 3, they are to proceed on a new heading to here. This is what they were supposed to do: head this way, and then head to point number 4. Fly on a third heading, 241 degrees for 120 nautical miles to there, and then 5 return back to Fort Lauderdale. Unfortunately, that's not exactly what happened. They got all the way out to point 3 here. They got all the way up to point 4, but then some inclement weather and clouds came in, and it was late. They got dark. They ended up kind of cruising all the way up to here. Exact position unknown, but they're estimating somewhere up here. Later, radio triangulation establishes the flight's approximate position way up here at 7. Then, unfortunately, there's a second incident, so they've gone missing. So a PBM-5 plane, which is a huge sort of a rescue plane, takes off, and it itself explodes. And so that's enveloped in part of the mystery, because this is where they thought they were. So this plane was going out to try to find them because they thought they were up here. Unfortunately, Taylor thought he and his crew were down here at point 10. So if you're here, what you want to do is go that way. But he's not there. And so when, he's thinking, well, I should, go due west. So they went the wrong direction. They could have just gone over land, but they didn't. Sorry, I slightly misspoke. So Taylor thought he was here, so he's going to go this way to get to land. In reality, he's up here at 7, and he's going this way. He thinks he's going to hit land. So they just fell in the drink here. And these planes, there's videos you can watch online where the exact same plane, they've tested this, sinks in about 45 seconds. So you have about 45 seconds to get out of the cockpit and get your little raft and try to get rescued. The plane sinks. It's gone. And people have looked for these planes, but, it's a vast empty ocean out there, so they've never been found. Taylor also said, revealingly, all 3 of my compasses have malfunctioned. Everything is wrong. Even the ocean doesn't look as it should. Right, because you're not where you think you are. That was the problem. Anyway, the Bermuda Triangle proponents of the mystery that it's supernatural or extraterrestrial or paranormal or whatever, they usually fail to mention that the one organization who would have a vested interest in figuring out exactly what happened is the U.S. Navy. And, of course, they issued a report, 500 pages long, and this is their conclusion. Taylor had mistakenly believed that the small islands he passed over were the Florida Keys, so his flight was over the Gulf of Mexico and heading northeast would take him to Florida, but that's not what he did. Then it was determined that Taylor had passed over the Bahamas as scheduled, and he did, in fact, lead his flight to the northeast over the Atlantic. Some subordinate officers did likely know their approximate position as indicated by radio transmissions, stating that flying west would result in reaching the mainland. Continuing, Taylor, although an excellent combat pilot and officer with the Navy, had a tendency to, they quote, fly by the seat of his pants, getting lost several times in the process. Twice during such times, he had to ditch his plane in the Pacific and be rescued. Okay, this is before Flight 19, obviously. They also concluded it wasn't Taylor's fault because the compasses stopped working. This report was subsequently amended to cause unknown by the Navy after Taylor's mother contended that the Navy was unfairly blaming her son for the loss of the 5 aircraft and 14 men when the Navy had neither the bodies nor the airplanes. Okay, fair enough. I can understand why a mother would want to do that. But again, cause unknown, what does that mean? It doesn't mean UFOs. It doesn't mean a black hole. It doesn't mean the lost continent of Atlantis. It doesn't mean it's a government secret program. It just means we don't know. Full stop. Okay, well, we pretty much do know in this particular case, right? The inclement weather, it got dark. These pilots weren't instrument training. In fact, most of the 14 pilots were trainees, so they weren't instrument rated to fly in the dark, to fly in inclement weather. And anyway, continuing as well, no commercial airlines have crashed or gone missing in that area. So it's always these single-engine or twin-engine small planes, the kind of planes that have trouble with inclement weather or whatever. And we know this. Phil Klass makes this point, the great UFO and aviation historian, that pilots have an option to pick their routes, and seniority gives you the best routes and so on. No pilots have ever said, "Oh, I don't want to fly over the triangle," for American Airlines or United Airlines or whatever. And the reason is because they know there's nothing to fear there that's any worse than anywhere else. So some of the natural explanations for some of these small planes and boats that go missing: compass variations, hurricanes and inclement weather, Gulf Stream anomalies, currents and ocean topography, methane eruptions. Not sure about that one, but that's a popular one these days. Rogue waves certainly happen. Deliberate acts of destruction, yes, you collect insurance money, which is why another organization that cares about these things, as we'll see, are insurance companies that have to pay out when a ship or plane goes missing. They want to know exactly what the cause was. And, of course, human error and inexperienced people, as well as unfit planes, boats, and ships. This happens. Okay, most of these planes and ships that go down were not U.S. Navy and well tested and trained and certified and so on. Okay, that's the problem. Continuing, a total. This was up to I think in the about mid 1980s, in this sort of time between Flight 19 and 1945 and mid 1980s. A total of 25 small single engine or twin engine planes disappeared. More small planes crashed over land in the United States. The difference is we have the wreckage. In the so-called Bermuda Triangle, the planes are just gone. They disappear because, they're underwater and it's deep, right? So as Klass investigated this, 2/3 of the pilots were not instrument rated for flying in poor visibility, the dark, or in inclement weather. Half of the pilots had fewer than 1,000 hours flying, so they were relative beginners. And there were many reports of running out of fuel, being lost, feeling disoriented, engine failure. We know this happens. JFK Jr. Lost his life along with his fiancée flying a plane, got disoriented, and couldn't see the horizon. And when you can't see the horizon, it's hard to tell whether you're going down or up. It doesn't seem like it should be like that, but that's the way it is. We're told by pilots, particularly those who cannot fly by instruments. Anyway, the heavy lifting on all of this material is by Larry Kusch. He is a librarian and then turned investigative journalist on this one. He spent years tracking down all these stories, the original reports, and so on. And he published this in his 1976 book, Bermuda Triangle Mystery Solved. And he really did solve it. So kudos to him, and we're all in debt to Larry for doing that. For example, he revealed inaccuracies and inconsistencies between Berlitz's account and statements from eyewitnesses, participants, and others involved in the initial incidents. And he noted cases where pertinent information went unreported. So, for example, the number of ships and aircraft reported missing in the area was not significantly greater, proportionally speaking, than in any other part of the ocean. In an area frequented by tropical storms, the number of disappearances that did occur were neither disproportionate, unlikely, nor mysterious. Furthermore, Kushi notes Berlitz and other writers would often fail to mention such storms. Okay, this is important. We're going to explore this in a little bit. This sort of, what's the baseline rate? Yeah, there's a base rate. What's the base rate fallacy, as it's called? You have some anecdotes of unusual things that happen, but how unusual are they? The only way to know is to know what the base rate is of those kinds of events and other related events to see how unusual that is. Okay, we'll see how this works in a minute. The numbers themselves were exaggerated by sloppy research. A boat's disappearance, for example, would be reported, but its eventual, if belated, return to port may not have been. You see how that works? So the newspaper may report, this plane or boat went missing, and then a couple of weeks later, the boat or plane is found, or they show up, they were lost, whatever, and that goes unreported. So if you're writing one of these spooky mystery books and you see the newspaper report, you quote from that, but then there either is no follow-up newspaper article, or there is and they ignore that or they don't know about it. Some disappearances had, in fact, never happened. One plane crash was said to have taken place in 1937 off of Daytona Beach, Florida, in front of hundreds of witnesses. But when Larry Kushi checked the local papers, there was nothing about it. And my favorite passage from Larry's book has to do with this issue that we've talked a lot about in this course, the burden of proof. Again, I'll just say it again. The burden of proof is not on scientists and skeptics to explain a mystery. The burden of proof is on the claimant. You're making the claim. Go ahead and make your best case, and we'll accept the evidence or reject the evidence, based on how good it is. So Kushi's point here, say I claim that a parrot has been kidnapped to teach aliens human language, and I challenge you to prove it's not true. You can even use Einstein's theory of relativity if you like. There's simply no way to prove such a claim is untrue. The burden of proof should be on the people who make these statements, to show where they got their information from, to see if their conclusions and interpretations are valid, and if they've left anything out. So to return to this base rate explanation, the Bermuda Triangle is one of the most heavily traveled shipping lanes in the world. Ships cross it daily for ports in the Americas, Europe, and the Caribbean islands. Cruise ships, pleasure craft regularly go back and forth between Florida and the islands. It's also a heavily flown route for commercial and private aircraft heading towards Florida, the Caribbean, and South America from points north. Okay, so what's the point? The point is if you have more traffic, you're going to have more accidents, just by definition statistically. But as I pointed out, there are no commercial, big jet airliners that have gone missing in the Bermuda Triangle. It's always these small single-engine, twin-engine planes, small boats mostly. Okay. Now, I mentioned these insurance companies, the biggest one, Lloyd's of London, which keeps detailed records of all disasters, noted in a UK Channel 4 TV special that there was nothing unusual about the triangular area that was beyond chance expectation based on the baseline rate for the amount of traffic in a given area. Boom. In other words, there's nothing to explain. There's no mystery to solve. Here's the U.S. Coast Guard investigation of a number of these so-called disappearances. It concluded that the number of supposed disappearances is relatively insignificant, considering the number of ships and aircraft that passed through the so-called triangle. They noted the 1972 explosion and sinking of the tanker SS VA Fog in the Gulf of Mexico. Quote, Coast Guard photographed the wreck and recovered several bodies. In contrast with the claim that all the bodies had vanished, with the exception of the captain, who was found sitting in his cabin at his desk, clutching his coffee cup. Oh, okay. This never happened. This is the product of imaginations of fiction writers. Or take the story of the Sandra. This first came to print in Fate magazine. Sea Mystery at Our Back Door article. The Sandra, here's the report from the author. The Sandra was a square-cut tramp steamer. Rust spots showed here and there along her 350-foot length. She carried 12 men and radio equipment. She had sailed from Savannah, Georgia, with 300 tons of insecticide destined for delivery in Puerto Cabello, Venezuela. It was DDT. Thumping her way leisurely southward through the heavily traveled steamer lanes off Jacksonville, the Sandra was on course. All was in order. From her bridge, the friendly winking beacon of St. Augustine Light must have been easily visible through the peaceful tropic dusk that shrouded the low Florida coastline off the starboard rail. Very dramatic. The crewmen had been at mess, and now those not on duty drifted aft to smoke and talk and reflect upon the dying day and what the morrow would bring. Probably not one of those present suspected he would never live to see it. When the search vessels and planes were called off several days later, the case was officially recorded as unsolved. Okay, not quite. But continuing, here's our friend Vincent Gaddis in his The Deadly Bermuda Triangle in Argosy that I mentioned earlier. In his report of the Sandra, a freighter 350 foot long, radio equipped, sailed from Savannah, Georgia, blah, 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 basically quoting the previous author. There's a lot of that. These books and articles about the Bermuda Triangle are very incestuous. They basically repeat each other's stories. Then she disappeared as completely as if she never existed in the tropic dust just off the Florida coast. There was another futile search by air and sea. No debris or bodies were ever found in the sea or on the beaches. Here's Charles Berlitz, same story, Bermuda Triangle, book, 1974. The freighter Sandra, bound for Puerto Cabello from Savannah in June 1950, carrying a cargo of insecticide, passed by St. Augustine, Florida, in good weather, and therefore all contact was lost and never reestablished. Okay, here's what really happened to the Sandra. This is from Larry Cushy's book. He went to the, Lloyd's of London, okay, that insured the ship. And from their list, April 24th, 1950, Miami, April 19th, the 185-foot Costa Rican Sandra. Okay, not 350 feet, 185 feet. See, these sources never get the details right like this. And details matter. 11 men on board, not 12. Okay. Lloyd's list, May 2nd, 1950, Miami. Search is being made for motor vessel Sandra, which left Savannah on April 5th. So on and so forth. Cargo of 340 tons of DDT not reported. June 3rd, United States Coast Guard has given up the search for the motor vessel Sandra, and the vessel is considered lost. What all those sources fail to include is the weather report for that day, which Cushy went and tracked down from the Miami Herald for Saturday, April 8th, 1950, when the ship allegedly disappeared. Quote, a storm growing from the low-pressure areas, which caused thunderstorms and strong winds in Florida during the past 3 days, approached hurricane force and buffeted Atlantic shipping lanes Friday. Winds reaching a speed of 73 miles an hour off the Virginia Cape, 2 miles an hour under hurricane strength. In other words, the Florida winds left a 40-foot shrimp boat, the St. Paul, missing at sea, and the Coast Guard started to search Friday. Okay, this is another example. So, in other words, and the Sandra sailed on April 5th. Okay, so they got the other sources got the date wrong. And it sailed right into a storm. Not perfectly clear weather. All right. So, and then there's a reporting bias. In 2011, my daughter Devin and I sailed on a ship from New York to Bermuda. Okay, this is an incredible story. Okay, hang on to your seats. You know what happened? Oh boy, this is huge. Nothing. Okay, so again, most ships and planes that go through, the vast majority, 99.9% go through, nothing ever happens. And you never hear about that, right? Oh, I'm going to write a book about the Bermuda Triangle and sailing through there and nothing happened. By definition, you don't report nothing. Okay, that's another problem with this whole thing. Finally, in science, we need to operationally define something very carefully. Exactly what do you mean by the triangle? And here it gets even sloppier. So the so-called Devil's Triangle, as it was called before it became the Bermuda Triangle, varies by author, right? So it could be any of these particular triangles, depending on if you want to put the shipwreck that was here. So you got to expand the triangle and make it larger, and so forth. In fact, there is an Alaskan triangle. It's funny they call it the Alaskan Bermuda Triangle. No, sorry. You can call it something else, the Anchorage Triangle or the Juneau Triangle or something like that. Anyway, here's the Japanese Triangle, or the Dragon's Triangle instead of the Devil's Triangle. In fact, one author found 10 vile vortices. Ooh, not dangerous triangles, but vile vortices. So, the vortice goes like this: boop, 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 boop. So here's the Devil's Triangle. Well, okay, so it's supposed to be the Dragon's Triangle, depending on. Here's the Easter Island Triangle, the famous Bermuda Triangle, and it just goes on and on. So you can make up stories about all of these things. Okay, it's not testable. There's no evidence that there's anything mysterious beyond what you would expect by chance. So as this one show had it, the Bermuda Triangle, science or myth? I'll take science, thank you. Okay, well, that wraps it up for us here. The point is I'm not that interested personally in the Bermuda Triangle, but it serves as a case study on how to think skeptically and critically about any particular claims. Pretty much all of them that we've dealt with in this course, or that we deal with in Skeptic Magazine, not all of them, but most of them, when you bore down into it, the individual stories themselves, when you look up the sources, check the author's references, and so on, most of the time the mystery unravels. By unravel, I mean it just disappears. There's nothing left to explain. End of story. End of lecture. Thanks for listening.